This is the second Sunday in Lent, and our scripture today has so much contextual history behind it. On the surface, it looks very simple, very accessible. Jesus is kind of annoyed with the reception he's getting and laments about how people don't understand it. But it starts with Pharisees coming to warn him about Herod. Now, what's really, really interesting about that is if Jesus is in Jerusalem, Herod has no legal standing. This is Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great. When Herod the Great was the ruler over all of Judea and Galilee, Syria, Samaria, that entire area, he ruled, according to the birth narrative, that he was in charge when Jesus was born. But when he died, he separated his land between three of his sons. The son who was in charge of Judea was not a great manager, and there's a long story there, but that's essentially how Rome took over Judea. But the northern part, Galilee, where Jesus actually grew up, was where Herod Antipas was. It's called the Tetrarch, so he was the ruler over that section of land. That's why when we get to the story of Good Friday, we have Jesus bouncing between Pilate and Herod Antipas. Who has jurisdiction? Because the temple is in the land where where Pilate has jurisdiction, but Jesus grew up and has his nationality is where Herod has jurisdiction. So that's where that battle comes for. So he's in Jerusalem, and the Pharisees, so not all of them are loyal to those who want to destroy Jesus, but the Pharisees come and warn him that Herod wants him dead. He better get moving. Herod has no authority in Jerusalem, so what's this all about? Herod and Jesus had this kind of interesting dance going on. Herod Antipas was the one that had John the Baptist killed. And he really believed, and this appears in the three Gospels anyway, I'm not sure if it's a reference in Josephus or not, but he believed that Jesus was a reincarnation of John the Baptist. So that killing John the Baptist, who had a lot to say about Antipas and his marrying his brother's wife, that with Jesus now, John had resurrected. He was back again to cause problems. And he had called a number of times, we see in the Gospel of Luke, to have a meeting with Jesus. It never happened. Does not happen between the two until Good Friday. So this is the first context. We have Jesus basically saying, that fox, that old guy, that sly guy, I'm not having anything to do with, he's just going to have to wait. I got stuff to do. And then, of course, he gives the metaphor of the 3 days. I'll do healing, and I'll do teaching, and I'll do my thing for a couple of days, and then the third day it'll be done. We recognize in hindsight that he's talking about resurrection. At the time, those who were reading this, or who were writing it, or who were expected to be living parallel or in the same time period as Jesus, would just see it as totally putting off one of the great heads of state in the area, and it would not end well for him regardless. Remember, when we're dealing with the scripture, we always have to deal with the time period of Jesus, the time period of the writer, and the time period where we're reading it, so we can understand what's going on in their context and bring it forward. We have to be really careful about not taking our context and putting it back. So in Jesus' context, he would not necessarily have made a statement that would have twigged to the officials of Herod that he's talking about Easter and resurrection. All they would have seen is this upstart teacher, this roaming prophet, this troublemaker, was telling Herod to just go take a hike. Wouldn't have ended well. So that's the first part of the scripture we're talking about. Jesus is already kind of pushing back at the political authority of the day in various means. And not everybody at the temple was consistent in their opinion about Jesus and his ministry, although I'm sure this response did not earn him any friends. And then we get into the lament. And Jesus does talk about Jerusalem, how sad it is. And he mentions that, I guess before the lament, he talks about how a prophet cannot be killed in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem. Well, That's historically not accurate. We have a lot of prophets who were actually killed outside of Jerusalem. But there's a spiritual content in that, that the teller of the truth is going to be in the center of the truth. And that is where he is going to die with the truth. It's very metaphorical. It should not be read as historic, because then we get into all sorts of problems with proving what Jesus was saying was false. And that's not the point. He was very well educated, better educated than we are in the history of his culture. So he would have known various people had physically died elsewhere, but that's not the point. That Jerusalem, not necessarily the city, but the concept, kills its own. That they're so focused on maintaining their hold over everything that they do not hear the words of the prophets. And remember, the words of the prophets, these are not predictions. These are teachers and wise people, or sometimes just people that God called to come and say, look, you're going to have problems if you don't change what you're doing. And Jerusalem was not prepared to hear that message. So they were responsible for the death of all the prophets in the metaphor that Jesus lays out. And then we get into the lament where Jesus is saying, and we're not sure who's sticking around to hear him, or he could just be speaking out loud. Jerusalem, you kill the prophets, I came to you, I want to protect you. He gives the metaphor of a mother hen gathering her chicks under her wings. And I'm willing to do that, and you don't want it. Statement on the ministry, on the message that Jesus was bringing, and how it was not received, how it was not wanted, it was not comfortable. I was at a bus stop the other day. I meet some very interesting people around the city. And this one guy started off telling me a joke, and I thought, okay, I can play along while we wait for the bus. And then he didn't get to the punchline before he started ranting about how people don't listen, how people are so convinced that they're right that they won't try anything else. Now, noted, the guy at the bus stop thought he was right, didn't appreciate that irony, and I didn't bother pointing it out to him. But it was a very interesting interaction on my part, and it reminded me a lot when I remembered it rather when I came to look at this passage. When people want the truth, and I do believe the vast majority of us want peace, we want justice, we want understanding, we want acceptance, we want inclusion, but we generally want it on our own terms, and we generally want it without having to give up anything in the process. People in power do not want to give up power. People in authority do not want to give up authority. And that's the essential of a lot of Jesus' gospel, is that we have to give it up. The whole metaphor of the camel and the gate, the telling the rich man that you have to give up all your wealth and give it away in order to be accepting or to be accepted of it. The conversation about being born anew, being born again. All of these are really, really hard concepts that all speak to ending the life that we understand, the life that we're comfortable in, and risking something new. It takes a very special or very hurt person to do that without question. And as Jesus is looking around Jerusalem, he realizes there are a lot of people who like what he has to say. There are not a lot of people who like what it means. And therein is the lament. I've come, I have told you, I've explained this to you. I promise you that it gets better. But that little bit of trust in getting over that hump, that's something people even today have a very, very hard time with. So hearing it in Jesus' day wouldn't have been any different. And then he gives us this last little bit. I will go, but I will not return until people are ready to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, as a 21st century Christian, it's a phrase we hear in songs and hymns at the end of Psalms, in various prayer services. But in Jesus' time, it had different meanings. It was basically a greeting. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't liturgical. Tradition holds that it's what the attendants of the bride called out when the bridegroom's procession was approaching her house. Here, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And the Lord is alternatively God or David, King David. There's also some suggestion that it's the Messiah, like the Messiah comes in the name of the Lord. So there's all sorts of meaning in all of this. But when you peel it all back, we get into the middle of what the lament is about, and it's that Jesus wishes, he's sad that people are not paying attention. His time is just about out. He knows that. Though people who want him dead definitely are hoping he knows that. And we're still not listening. 2,000 years later, we're still really not listening. We have to do life different. We have to make it better. We cannot keep going on the way we have. We are, in this period of time, more like the time period of Jesus than perhaps any other time through our 2,000 years of history. There's great struggle right now. There's great fear. There's the unknown. There's a question. There's friends turning into enemies. There's new alliances being formed all the time. It's uncertain. The only core we can hold on to as Christians is that Jesus gave us a path, gave us a way to do it differently, that promises to be all right in the end. But we have to have that bravery to walk on that. And quite honestly, when we're on the cusp of maybe everything we know being turned up and down anyway, might as well do it. It's simple, it's plain, it's clear, it's laid out for us. And helping each other, loving each other, serving each other, standing up for each other, even if we get hurt, might actually be the time now for us to start listening to Jesus. Maybe the lament is a reminder for us. Those feathers that Jesus wants to gather us under might not be such a bad bargain after all.